Welcome to American Old West tales. In the rugged landscape of the American frontier, life was filled with danger, adventure, and the constant struggle against the forces of nature. From encounters with Native American tribes to battles against outlaws and the relentless challenges of surviving in untamed territories, the stories of the Old West are as varied as they are captivating. Join us as we delve into the thrilling and sometimes tragic events that shape the history of the American West. The establishment and growth of the United States of America was a gradual process, marked by significant challenges, conflicts, and bravery. From the first settlers grappling with untamed wilderness to the courageous pioneers pushing relentlessly westward across the Great Plains, peril was ever present. While many Americans eventually sought refuge in the safety of established towns and cities in the East, a courageous minority were drawn to the allure of the unknown. These trailblazers and settlers embarked on perilous journeys, navigating a precarious balance between survival and peril. What ensues are accounts of their remarkable endeavors. Our initial tale is a well-known one, partly due to the acclaim of the 2015 film The Revenant. It's a semi-biographical narrative featuring Leonardo DiCaprio as the 19th century American frontiersman, Hugh Glass. Over the years, the explorer's saga has been recounted numerous times. Prior to the 2015 movie, several literary works, TV episodes, and cinematic interpretations delved into his harrowing experience, each with varying degrees of accuracy. In summary, Glass successfully defended himself against a savage grizzly bear attack while guiding an expedition through the wilderness. Despite sustaining grave injuries and being abandoned for dead, the determined frontiersman managed to crawl 250 miles back to civilization, defying the odds and surviving the entire ordeal. Regardless of the embellishments added to Glass's story over time, historians concur on two remarkable and unsettling facts. Firstly, Hugh Glass was the real deal. Born around 1783, he devoted his entire adult life to the frontier. Even before the ill-fated Ashley expedition of 1823, he had already established himself as a dependable hunter, tracker, and frontiersman. Moreover, Glass genuinely did survive the initial onslaught of the enraged grizzly bear single-handedly. Despite sustaining severe injuries, he managed to fire a shot from his pistol, which frightened off the bear and alerted his fellow trappers. Together, they ultimately killed the grizzly. The rest of Glass's tale, though sometimes exaggerated, remains noteworthy. His fellow trappers carried him through the wilderness for 2 days, slowing the entire party and putting them in immediate danger as a hostile band of Arikara Indians pursued them. Despite the peril, expedition leaders refused to euthanize Glass, instead opting to leave 2 volunteers behind with him until he passed away from his injuries. Fictionalized versions of the story suggest that fellow trapper John Fitzgerald attempted to kill Glass to recover lost investments and expedite his escape. However, Fitzgerald simply fled because he believed Glass was already dead, a belief later confirmed by others. Glass endured alone in the wilderness for weeks, nursing a burning desire for revenge against the men who left him for dead. Despite festering wounds, fractured bones, and deep gashes on his back, he painstakingly crawled back to the Missouri River. Surviving on whatever he could scavenge from the forest floor, including insects and the discarded remains of nearby predators, Glass eventually caught up with the duo of men. He threatened to take one's life and publicly shamed the other. However, the resilient frontiersman met his end a decade later along the Yellowstone River in 1833 when he was slain by a hostile group of Arikaras. Mother Nature emerged as a fierce opponent on the American frontier, unleashing her wrath upon pioneers and settlers through various deadly means. In the spring of 1840, she manifested as a devastating tornado that obliterated the small river town of Natchez, Mississippi. Ranked as the second deadliest twister in U.S. history, the storm claimed the lives of 317 citizens and left around 100 others injured, an unprecedented scenario where deaths outnumbered injuries in tornado history. Current assessments suggest that the cyclone's death toll might have been even higher, as enslaved individuals were not included in the official count of fatalities. On the evening of May 6, 1840, the atmosphere in the small southern town resembled any other typical evening. The area was drenched in heavy spring rains, saturating plantations and causing the Mississippi River to swell. Farmers, blacksmiths, and ordinary citizens sought refuge from the storm, hoping for it to pass. As dawn broke, signaling the arrival of a new day, the riverbanks came alive with bustling steamboat activity. Despite the muddy fields making agricultural work difficult, river traders and laborers were already engaged in their efforts to make profits. In a time devoid of phones or weather radar, none of them had the means to anticipate what lay ahead. Around noon, a second thunderstorm descended upon the town, giving birth to the deadly twister along the riverbanks, approximately 20 miles south of Natchez. The tornado wound its way northeastward, following the bustling Mississippi River, growing in intensity with each passing mile. As it descended upon the town with a deafening roar, it tossed flatboats around as if they were mere toys. Despite hundreds of people scrambling for shelter, the onslaught was relentless. Entire houses were ripped from their foundations, while barrels and carts became airborne projectiles. The tornado left destruction in its wake, flattening everything in its path. According to a period newspaper report, the scene was described as unparalleled desolation and ruin. Considering that the tornado hit during a time when organizations like the National Weather Service, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or the American Red Cross did not exist, the situation was even more dire. The residents of Natchez, left to fend for themselves on the western frontier, had to rebuild their lives in almost complete isolation. Today, experts estimate that the storm caused around $21 million in damage. Considering inflation, some meteorologists even speculate that the storm might have reached an F6 rating, a classification deemed nearly impossible by contemporary weather experts. According to official records from Deadwood in January 1877, a man managed to survive for 67 days after being shot in the head with a revolver. The incident unfolded as David Lunt was chatting with friends at a local saloon when a disturbed drunk barged in. Town Marshal Con Stapleton intervened to disarm the aggressor, who accidentally shot Lunt in the head while struggling with Stapleton. Normally, being shot in the face with a revolver spells certain death. However, against all odds, David Lunt sat up, brushed himself off, and made his way home. Shocked witnesses watched as Lunt left the bar and walked back to his house, with a bullet hole clear through his head. Remarkably, Lunt showed no signs of pain and resumed his daily activities, while the intoxicated assailant was taken into custody. Around 2 months later, Lunt began experiencing severe headaches. Eventually, he succumbed to his injuries. An autopsy revealed that a fragment of Lunt's skull had penetrated his brain, leading to a fatal abscess. During the early 1840s, Margaret Handley Erskine shared a harrowing first-hand account of frontier life with her family. As a young mother and wife, Margaret experienced a traumatic event when she was abducted by Shawnee Indians while journeying from Virginia to Kentucky. She had recounted her ordeal on previous occasions, but the emotional toll of reliving the capture and captivity had taken its toll. Fortunately, her grandson, Alan T. Caperton, documented her final retelling of the events, which was later archived by the West Virginia Division of Culture and History. On September 23, 1779, Margaret Erskine, then known as Margaret Pauley, set out from Monroe, Virginia, with her first husband, John Pauley, and their infant daughter, along with 3 other armed men and another family. Their aim was to forge new lives further west. Near the mouth of the East River, present-day Matthews County, Virginia, their journey took a horrifying turn when 6 Shawnee Indians ambushed the group. Margaret attempted to flee but was ruthlessly struck from her horse from behind. The enraged Shawnees killed the men, seized the women, and tragically murdered Margaret's helpless infant daughter. The Shawnees brought Margaret and the other captives to their camp, subjecting them to beatings and depriving them of food and water for days on end. Margaret endured 5 grueling years in Shawnee captivity, surviving an attempt on her life and giving birth to her second child in the wilderness. As the Shawnee clashed with white militias and the U.S. Army, Margaret and her child lived amidst the ongoing conflict as the frontier expanded westward. Eventually, Margaret and her child were discovered and freed from captivity by a frontiersman. He escorted them back east to Pittsburgh, where Margaret rebuilt her life. She remarried, expanded her family, and lived to the age of 89. Bring up frontier history, and before long, shootouts and gunslingers become part of the discussion. Gunfights played a pivotal role in shaping the narrative of the Old West, with individuals making their mark on both sides of the law. While popular culture often immortalizes well-known figures like Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, and Billy the Kid, there are lesser-known figures who were equally formidable. Captain Jonathan R. Davis stands out among them, a tough, no-nonsense militiaman and gold rush prospector from the mid-19th century. Born and raised in South Carolina, Captain Davis initially enlisted in the Palmetto Regiment of Volunteers, a sanctioned militia unit that served the United States during the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48. His unit earned federal recognition towards the end of the conflict after participating in multiple frontline battles. During the Battle of Churubusco on August 20th, 1847, Davis sustained severe injuries near Mexico City, where several of his fellow volunteers lost their lives or suffered serious wounds. After the war concluded, Davis shifted his focus to prospecting and set out in pursuit of gold. In the winter of 1854, Davis and two fellow prospectors encountered trouble near Sacramento, California. A gang of 11 armed bandits, known for their violent crimes, swiftly attacked and killed Davis's companions. Refusing to retreat, Davis fought back, wielding his Colt revolvers against the assailants. He managed to take down 7 of the outlaws before exhausting his ammunition. Unfazed, Davis grabbed his Bowie knife and continued the confrontation. When the dust settled, one outlaw lay dead, another had his nose severed, and a third sustained serious injuries. The remaining bandits fled for safety, realizing they had underestimated their opponent. Scalping, a brutal tradition, involved the removal of human scalps from the skull and was practiced by various martial societies in the past. In the New World, this custom emerged independently among Native American tribes. While Native American warriors gained notoriety among white settlers for this practice, it was also prevalent in pre-colonial times, often occurring during intertribal conflicts. Despite its association with Native Americans, one of the most notorious and grisly scalpings in the American West was carried out not by a Native American, but by the renowned white figure, Buffalo Bill Cody. Born in 1846, William Frederick Cody carved out a reputation for himself as a Pony Express courier and soldier, rising to prominence as the Army's chief of scouts for the 3rd U.S. Cavalry. His moniker, Buffalo Bill, stemmed from his tenure working with the Kansas Pacific Railroad, during which he hunted down over 4,000 buffalo in just 18 months. Transitioning into show business, Cody gained renown as a showman in the eastern United States, where he organized and starred in a series of highly successful Wild West shows in major cities like Chicago and New York. Along his journey, Cody cultivated numerous friendships, including with the young and charismatic cavalry officer George Armstrong Custer. Cody was furious upon learning of Custer's demise at Little Big Horn in the summer of 1876. Seeking revenge, he confronted a group of hostile Indians at Warbonnet Creek. In a frenzy, Cody slew and scalped one of the Cheyenne warriors, Yellow Hand. He famously brandished the gruesome trophy, declaring, "The first scalp for Custer." Given their understanding of Cody's drive for vengeance following Little Big Horn, the Eastern media and public were surprisingly sympathetic of this conduct. Cody even incorporated the scalping incident into his Wild West show, reportedly using the actual scalp as a promotional tactic. Over time, the American public's perception of Cody shifted, especially after the U.S. Army quelled the remaining Native American resistance on the Great Plains. Newspapers and concerned citizens began to condemn Cody, who persisted in glorifying the events at Warbonnet Creek, even as most Native Americans were confined to reservations. Eventually, Cody altered his Wild West show, removing the scalp from the program. In his later years, he publicly expressed remorse for his actions in taking the scalp, yet he still embraced the fame he earned on the frontier. Despite its barbarity, the act of scalping remains a prominent aspect of American Western history, surrounded by numerous images and stories. During the period when Buffalo Bill claimed his first scalp in honor of Custer, another significant event unfolded near the Texas Panhandle. Indian raiders swept across the Great Plains, encouraged by the remarkable victories of the Sioux and Cheyenne at Rosebud Creek and Little Bighorn. In December 1876, a large group of Comanches left the reservation in northwest Texas, following suit. These renegades clashed with a group of advancing buffalo hunters during the winter of 1877, sparking a prolonged and violent conflict. In response, the Army dispatched Captain Nicholas Merritt Nolan and the Buffalo Soldiers of the 10th U.S. Cavalry to pursue these insurgents. On July 10, 1877, Nolan and about 60 soldiers left Fort Concho in the direction of the Llano Estacado area of the Staked Plains. Spanning 30,000 square miles, this plateau is harsh and unforgiving. While it's home to over 1 million people today, during the late 19th century, the Great American Desert was an uninhabited wilderness. On their journey to the plateau, Nolan encountered a group of resentful bison hunters who reluctantly agreed to accompany his expedition. However, the next 2 weeks proved disastrous. Alcohol, inadequate planning, and shortages of supplies, coupled with a mutual distrust between the two groups, led to their ultimate downfall. After a night of heavy drinking, the men set out from camp on July 19, 1877. Most of the Buffalo Soldiers, clad in wool, suffered under the relentless Texas sun, while the experienced hunters and civilian scouts criticized the inexperienced troopers for not conserving their water in the scorching heat. Some of the scouts grew impatient and abandoned the group after several days of fruitless scouting. Determined to prove himself as a capable frontier commander, Nolan pressed on recklessly. As the company began to run low on water, it foreshadowed what would later be remembered as the Thirsting Time, a 5-day battle for survival on the Staked Plains. In an attempt to catch up with the Comanches, the hunters and troops marched 17 miles on July 26th. They scoured the area for water, but all they found were dried-up lake beds. Faced with desperation, the group resorted to sucking dew from small plants or digging shallow wells in vain. Over the following 3 days, desperate men drank their own urine or the blood of dead horses. Some soldiers, driven mad by thirst, even cut open their wrists to quench their thirst. Miraculously, search parties located the column a few days later. The ordeal, which claimed the lives and sanity of several men, was later dubbed by newspapers as the Staked Plains Horror of 1877. The last story on our list of terrifying tales involves another devastating force of nature. Known as one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in the history of the American West, the Great Flood of 1862 remains unmatched in scale for California, Oregon, and Nevada. Triggered by unprecedented rainfall, snowmelt, and an unusually warm storm during the winter of 1861 and 1862, the flood engulfed numerous towns along the swelling Columbia River. From northern Oregon to the southern reaches of New Mexico, the raging waters obliterated everything and everyone in their wake. The unprecedented and erratic nature of this event, combined with the absence of modern weather forecasts and relief organizations, added complexity to the catastrophe. For over 40 days, hundreds of thousands of Americans grappled with relentless rainfall and rising floodwaters, struggling for survival. The impact of the flooding varied across regions, but few areas were spared. In Oregon, the normally towering Willamette Falls became navigable for steamboats. Lynn City, Champwig, and Orleans were obliterated and never rebuilt. Miners in parts of Idaho found themselves trapped and facing starvation. California's Central Valley was engulfed by raging waters, swallowing entire communities. While the death toll remained relatively low, the local infrastructure, livestock, and economies suffered severe blows. Recovering from the disaster spanned more than a decade, leaving thousands impoverished or abandoned for generations to come.